Hello, my name's Laura Lear and welcome to the Thoughtful Leadership Podcast from Ambitious. Have you ever wondered what it takes to drive a business through a crisis, such as the pandemic that we all went through 5 years ago? Well, today's guest is an expert on this. He is the former CEO of one part of ComputerShare, the global shares transfer company. Prior to that, he also held senior roles at Lloyd's Bank for over 20 years. Welcome to the podcast, Naz Sarkar. It's great to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So on that point, the pandemic, you were in a leadership role, leading one of the divisions of ComputerShare globally, and crisis hit. Where do you start when it comes to driving a business through that sort of crisis?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very challenging time. I was based in New York at the time, running our global business. We had customers all around the world, governments, large corporations who depended on us. And then, we were hearing through the preceding months about, a crisis in Asia, diseases. We have a business in Hong Kong, and they'd gone through, obviously, a pandemic of types earlier with the bird flu syndrome. So there was some experience, and talking to colleagues, it's going to last a few months, it's going to be over, it's not going to be a huge thing. And, we were just carrying on. And obviously, as days and weeks went by, I remember in the US, I think it was on the West Coast, we started seeing, a change. And I remember the week as clear as anything, because businesses in New York started to send people home, and within a very quick time, we had to make a decision to close our offices, send people home. However, we run a business which provides critical financial infrastructure. It's not optional. It's at the heart of the operation of capital markets. So we had to carry on. So on the one hand, we were vacating offices. On the other hand, we had to pretty quickly think about how we're going to make sure these essential services stay online, support our customers, keep our people safe, all at a time when in New York 1,000 people were dying a day in the city. So it was challenging.
Obviously a very challenging time for many people and many businesses. What do you think was the key feature that you were able to provide to your teams globally at that point? What was key to a successful role at helming a business?
Yeah, we lived by a pretty simple mantra, which was do the right thing. Now, doing the right thing can mean a lot of things, and when you've got competing demands, doing the right thing doesn't become an easy choice. On the one hand, we had to, as I said, make sure that we were providing the essential services to our clients and our customers, including governments. That stability in the financial markets was important, because the last thing we needed was a medical crisis and a financial crisis. But keeping our people safe was incredibly demanding. Now, we were very fortunate because very quickly we were able to bring on technology solutions which did allow people largely to work from home. But components of the service had to be delivered physically, had to be done. And our attention was firmly focused on, well, okay, how do we keep those people who do have to travel, do have to go into offices or facilities, do have to be in how do we keep them safe? And I think it was helped by the fact, not just the leadership team, even though the company was huge, diverse, globally diverse in terms of geographically, but also in terms of the types of people and types of mentality and outlook, we were close-knit. And I think that level of personal relationships at the leadership team and the management team more generally allowed us to make decisions quickly, communicate them effectively, get the latest information in, digest it, and try and make the right decisions as quickly as we could.
And I know you've talked before about human connection and that importance of that communication, and obviously at a time like this, I'm sure that's crucial. Can you talk a bit about that and why it's so critical to get that right?
Yeah, well, I think I've spent most of my career with some kind of old-fashioned management ideas. I grew up, management by walking around, going around, talking to people, I love the idea wherever I went of walking the floor, stopping, talking to people, understanding where people were coming from, understanding their stories, what was on their minds. You move from that to a full working from home situation. It's a kind of it's a chalk and cheese change, and of course relying on video and audio and connections still was incredibly important, but it was no substitute for those personal relationships. And as the pandemic went on, and it wasn't over in 5 or 6 weeks, it carried on, it became very, very difficult. And of course we're still seeing that today in terms of that big debate about working from home, working back in the office. What's the right mix? How do we balance it? And I think, of course, it was the forerunner of a huge amount of debate which went far beyond COVID to the nature of work and what it means to what work means and how people can be productive and engaged in the workplace. So it was the start of something much bigger than we thought.
And I think, as you said, that it was already in train, a lot of that, wasn't it? It's just COVID came along and kind of escalated it and pushed it forward very quickly.
Absolutely, because I think, we were already engaged in terms of flexible working, and flexible working was a component of our desire for greater diversity in the workplace, and greater diversity and greater gender equality and gender diversity, in particular at leadership roles, necessitated flexible working. So we were already on that journey, but clearly COVID and was a milestone in terms of the abrupt change. And on the one hand, it of course showed us that it is feasible to conduct many services completely offline, but of course in time it also emphasized the need for that personal contact, the benefits you get through communication face to face, not only internally but with your customers, understanding the markets, the nuances of life still come through in direct personal conversations and personal interaction. And I think marrying the two is a great challenge for today's management and leadership teams around the world. How do they do that and bring their customers, bring their people with them in terms of the right mix and the right outcomes? It's an incredibly difficult challenge, I think.
Absolutely, especially in a global business, I would imagine, and just having to deal with various markets and time zones as well, and that communication, how you ensure that's consistent.
Yes, yeah, because I think the expectations are different around the world, and you cannot assume, and every time you do assume, you find yourself feeling rather stupid, that everywhere is the same, or everyone's expectations are the same, either geographically or by culture or by tradition. I found that in many places in the world, work has a different sense of status or expectation. Going to work means different things, and there was a much quicker return because people wanted to return, whereas in other countries and other places with other cultures, there was a different tendency, and I think we've got to be mindful of that, and that's why. Every time you think, oh, we've cracked that, that's the answer, and when you test it against all your different use cases, you find, well, it's not as straightforward as you thought. And that's why I go back to, doing the right thing sounds easy, but doing the right thing often results in conflicts, trade-offs, different opinions. And I think the task in the end is to say, rather than wallowing in, oh, it's all too difficult, there comes a point where you have to make those decisions and then live by those decisions and explain why that's the particular way you're going, even though it may not suit everyone. And clearly you can't keep everyone happy all the time.
And how do you, in that role globally, keep a sense of great culture, particularly when you're going through a crisis, and also just in, as you say, different markets, different nuances in terms of culture and style of ways of working, work ethics? How do you
and I think that was one of the areas where, not being in constant contact definitely made a difference. I think culture is not impossible in a remote environment, but it's more difficult. When you are seeing your colleagues regularly, you're interacting with them, there's trust, knowledge and know-how. The idea of common purpose and a common kind of vision of where you're going becomes easier. It's not automatic just because you end up in it certainly is not automatic, but it becomes easier. Equally, in a fully remote environment, it's not impossible, but leadership has to be much more mindful about what they're doing to create that, getting people together, that common purpose, that common trust and knowledge. You have to work much harder at it. So, and I think we're seeing it today in terms of businesses looking for a greater return. Those companies, clearly have made a decision that, of course, it's easier, and they want people there. And they see that as a way forward in terms of building a better, stronger culture at work.
And how, I'm interested, you strong background in both finance and tech.
Yeah.
Both industries have probably suffered with a sort of reputation for being quite male focused, probably not so strong when it comes to the sort of in the past, equality and diversity. How have you seen that change over your time in leadership roles, and what have been the biggest challenges?
Well, it's been an incredible change. I mean, when I started work in the late 80s, early 90s, the level of diversity in financial services and technology was very, very low. And I look back now, and one of the mantras, certainly in the bank, and this was an accepted wisdom in financial services, in relationship roles, people used to say, people like themselves. And it seemed a very innocuous way of explaining. Of course, you needed to get on with people. You needed to have common purpose. So, yeah, of course, the more you could reflect what your customers were saying, the more likely that you'd build rapport, the more likely you'd have a successful personal and business relationship. It sounds pretty innocuous, but actually, as time goes on and you think, well, if only people saw each other who were like themselves, there was never going to be any change. And in those early days in my career, it was a very white male dominated hierarchy. Now, of course, things began to change, and I think you had to start questioning people liking themselves. And of course, to start with, you just think, well, of course, now we're thinking this way, things will just get better. But rarely does just kind of coming to that realization mean that there's going to be effective change. And really, we had a lot of debates about whether, setting targets, setting ambitions, positive action and positive ways of encouraging diversity in the US. There were some measures to do that, but there was great debate around, in our organisation, not just amongst men, but also our women colleagues, about what people wanting to do things on their own merit, not seeing that it's been done as a means of some kind of quota. But it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think you have to fundamentally look at your recruitment processes, your training, your development, how you're recruiting, how you're making work and senior roles available through flexibility in people's careers at the point that they need it. And I think that started to make a difference. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think really the work will always be there, because I think, I don't think that journey about real diversity is anywhere near complete today.
No.
There's going to be a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. And you mentioned purpose as well. We touched on that, I know, when we spoke previously. How can you drive purpose through organisations, particularly some of these larger corporate machines who are well established? They have a very clear view on what they need to deliver, and that's often the focus. How do you make that change to be more purpose-led?
And I think that's interesting. If you think about a lot of businesses, and when they talk about their objectives, they tend to be in financial terms, business success terms, particularly listed companies serving their shareholders. Of course, the purpose of business for them. Certainly, when I was growing up in the bank, there was really only one purpose, that was to deliver shareholder value. And it's not unreasonable that your purpose was there to think about shareholder value and how you're delivering shareholder value. Of course, you have to think about, well, that may be your aim, but does that really draw people to work and be effective? And the answer clearly is no. I think what I found in my work life was, it's when you spoke to people about delivering service to customers, particularly around, as I say, we were working in an essential service, and why that service was significant, why it mattered not only to us and our customers, but the wider society. What was its purpose, and what were they doing in terms of helping deliver that? I think that was a much more engaging conversation than, we need to make more money this year than we did last year. We need to be more efficient, or I think people reacted to the fact that they were part of a mission that was doing a worthwhile activity, and I think that helped. We did a lot of work in both local communities and globally, and I think that was interesting. We were a global company. On the one hand, we sponsored a number of projects around the world in areas that particularly required them, and in some cases, causes which weren't readily addressed by others. Difficult causes, for example, rape crisis in South Africa, which one of the countries that we operated in. Really difficult projects, but ones that we thought were worthwhile. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that people who live in local communities were we were supporting projects and activities which were close to people's hearts. For example, here in Bristol, where ComputerShare had a large operation. So I think that mix of how you bring people to what you're doing beyond financials, how you work with local and global projects to kind of reflect what you're saying, but by doing the right things, not just talking about the right things. I think they're important in terms of creating that purpose.
Well, absolutely, and it's always, I'm just very interested in the kind of that balance piece between the profit, people, and planet. And as you said, there's often, particularly with listed companies, the shareholders that usually are key. But obviously, people want to work, as you say, for purpose-led businesses. Actually, you're going to gain better skilled people if you are thinking about people and planet.
That's right, and I think that goes to the heart of it. I think there was a debate. What's the point? Well, the point is, I think it comes back to, because it's the right thing anyway. And then just as individuals, do we want to be engaged in things which aren't right? We're spending such a lot of time at why would we be doing something which wasn't right and positive? And secondly, as you say, if you want to really attract the right talent, then people are going to see through if you're just talking about something and not actually doing it. So if you're going to do it, you might as well do it properly, which is another kind of great way that we used to talk about it. If you're going to do something, don't do it half-heartedly. Just do it properly, because in the long term, it will be easier, more straightforward, and kind of a halfway house is probably worse than not doing it at all. So I think that was good, and I think when we saw people coming into the organisation, I always used to think about skills, and knowledge, and attitude. And I think skills and knowledge you can train and you can help people with, but I think getting the right people who are attracted to you because their mentality and their outlook and their approach, I think that was so important to me. And I think if you want to get the best people with the best attitudes to not just their environment or workplace, but also innovation and delivering great service, or delivering great product, or having developed great strategies, well, then you need people with those kind of attitudes, and you're not going to attract those. You're not going to attract those kind of people, the best people, if you're kind of not on their page. And I think that's really important.
Have you, in your kind of from a global perspective, seen, do you feel, are we more progressive in the US, for example, than the UK? Have you seen any country that seems to be sort of more progressive when it comes to driving forward the equality and diversity agenda?
Well, I think countries are at different spots, actually, in terms of where they are. I think we think, when we think about the US, we think of a very laissez-faire, hire them, sack them kind of economy. But at the same time, it's also kind of pretty fairly highly regulated. There's lots of different rules and legislation around recruitment and how it's done, how salaries are disclosed, positive discrimination, for example, and therefore, actually, in many ways, kind of our vision of a cut and thrust US actually belies the fact that in many ways they do a lot to further some of the kind of changes that we've been talking about in terms of diversity and gender equality and gender pay than other countries. Now, you could say that its sheer scale of the US economy allows, and its non-reliance on the rest of the world to a greater extent than any other economy in the world, means that they've got the opportunity to do that. Whereas, constantly we're seeing it currently in terms of the debate in the UK. You change legislation, and of course there is a concern about where that leaves the UK in terms of competitiveness, in terms of the global market. So I think you do see differences, and in some cases there's an arbitrage around. We've got the lowest set of rules where we are more we're appealing to more companies, and that's been a debate here, really post-Brexit. What should our legislative base be, and should it be set to give the UK a competitive advantage compared to continental Europe, for example? But I think that's quite a dangerous place to be, to kind of to use, for example, employment and other rights as an arbitrage in terms of attracting business. Certainly, as a general kind of way of doing business, we were in many countries, but as a general rule, we wanted to apply the same policies around the world. Now, that wasn't always possible because of local legal and regulatory requirements. But as a general rule, the ambition was to try and not kind of arbitrage in that way.
Interested a bit more in sort of your own individual leadership style, and being, this podcast is around thoughtful leadership, and that means many things. It can be broadly about how businesses run. It can be about the individual as well. And obviously, being a CEO in that role at the helm of a business, how did you go about engaging you talk about the communication, engaging teams, and what do you think are key attributes of a great, successful leader today?
Well, yeah, I think you go, in ups and downs in terms of your own level of confidence in terms of what you're doing and where you're at, because you think you're doing the right thing, you realize there comes a shock revelation that maybe it's not, and you have moments of kind of doubt as to whether you're going in the right direction or not. I spent a lot of I wouldn't class myself as naturally a thoughtful person. If you ask my wife, I think she'll probably agree. But I spent a lot of time trying to think through and really spend time as to whether a certain course of action was the right thing. But at the same time, you didn't have the luxury of just kind of waiting. I think it was important that you were making decisions in an effective way. But I did spend a lot of time thinking through, particularly as I realized that it's very different, as I say, when you're in a global context. What you say, how you say it, how it's going to be interpreted, and what it means is going to be can be very different. So I think really trying to learn from not only your own mistakes but other people's mistakes as well, as to how you're going to what you're going to say, how you're going to say it. I mean, a good example of that, at the same time as we had the pandemic, we had the George Floyd kind of killing in the US, which was a huge impact socially, and you had to really think about, what is it? Is it just something that's happening out there? Should we talk about it within our business? What should we say? How should we say it? Where should we say it? Was a difficult debate, and there was major disagreements as to what and how and when, and I'm not sure we got all of that right, to be perfectly frank. But I think in all of those cases, you think about, are you trying to do the right thing? Have you thought about it? Have you taken different views into consideration? And then if you end up still not getting it quite right, can you at least look at yourself and say, well, I can learn something from that, or maybe I should have done that differently.
It's a really interesting area, that confidence, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people will be thinking, a CEO, a leader, they have all the confidence, they have all the answers. But actually, as you say, you don't always have all the answers. You've got to test things. And a lot of people, I've heard talking about vulnerability and leadership being so key, that empathy piece, and also being vulnerable. And obviously you need to be able to make those difficult decisions and make hard decisions sometimes, but actually showing vulnerability is really important. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that, and I think you have to reflect that when you're kind of justifying what you've decided to people who then disagree with you. I think you have to say, of course, we looked at that, but this is the way we've gone, and this is why we've done it, and you have to be confident that you've taken the things into consideration. I think that is important, because if you then don't make a decision, I think that's as costly as anything else. Of course, if everything was straightforward, we can program a computer to make decisions, and it'd be, you don't need, and I used to kind of go through this example. If everything was just formulaic, we don't need people to do that, particularly today with technology evolving. But of course, I'm a great believer you do need people, because it's about context, nuance, and making decisions in a way that are much more difficult than just a formula which says this is the outcome or this is the output. Because generally speaking, when you're talking about people, businesses, or even kind of negotiations, it rarely follows a completely logical kind of or straightforward formulaic type of argument, but instead, one of where feelings and thoughts and personalities and other things come into play, and trying to get those as in terms of forming the overall context becomes the challenge.
And presumably that's why, if you're in a role, in a CEO or MD role, whatever that leadership role is, you rely on those experts and people around you. And often people say you're only as good as the people around you.
Yeah, but it's interpreting their advice, So I think lawyers, risk management, HR, you got a lot of experts talking to you, but their views tend to be relatively narrow, relatively expert, but you have to bind all those things together to form your own view then as to what the decision is, and particularly today around legal risk, and how do you view those? How do you view the possibilities of those outcomes, and how do you weigh those against what you want to do? Because if you're not careful, you're paralyzed into doing anything because you think there's a HR risk, there's a legal risk, there's a regulatory risk, there's a geopolitical risk. We see uncertainty and risk everywhere, but doing it in a thoughtful way, because you can't be reckless in terms of decision making, but you have to balance those issues up and then positively have something to say and a rationale as to where we're going, how we're going to navigate that and move forward. And it's difficult, but also incredibly rewarding in terms of seeing progress and saying, I've kind of helped move the business in that direction.
And where do you think leadership's going? Do you think it will change more? Because I think 20 years ago, probably a lot more authoritative layers. Businesses are shifting, far more collaborative, far often flat structures, not completely, but, they are, moving towards that where everyone has a voice. And I think that's obviously really beneficial, but you still need people to guide and lead. What are the challenges there, and where do you think it will go?
I think it's bound to change, and it's bound to change because change is constant, it's recurring. I have 3 sons. I see them growing up, and I see their view of work and how they work. It's very, very different. I think we still grew up at a time when we were kind of thankful to be at work. We were waiting for instructions to be told, and we were kind of grateful. I think work is part of a wider set of priorities. They have different views about where they're working, what they're doing. They value experiences differently. I think work engaging that talent needs to think differently. And in a world where many things can be done by machines, by computers, by AI, the talent that can actually make a difference will have choices in a way that we didn't previously. So I think it's going to work, what it means, how it's done, how it's rewarded. I think all of that is set for change in a way that we can't really predict. But it's going to be, if you think about that together with all the other things that are happening around the world in terms of political, environmental, social challenges. And one thing's for sure, it's going to be very, very different. And I think probably the management and leadership that's emerging today will have to cope with a completely different set of challenges to the ones we have as we've gone through the 80s and through the millennium change. Yeah.
And what now for you? What are you've obviously no longer at ComputerShare and taken on a slightly different role.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of kind of leadership and how are you supporting organisations now?
Yeah, so I retired from full-time work just about 2 years ago, but I'm still doing some non-executive work. I'm chair of a company that is growing and scaling up based out of London, providing governance services, Kuberno. They're on an extremely exciting journey, UK-based, but expanding into the US. They've had some investment. And, it's amazing to be with a young company as it kind of starts its journey. And as you say, they're completely different set of presets in terms of what the business is. It's fully remote, it's diverse, it's starting from a completely different benchmark. It's very exciting. I'm advisor to a US startup which is just beginning its journey. Once again, very exciting to be part of that. These being part of new, young, recently born companies compared to large organizations, I think it's on the one hand it's very different for me, on the other hand it's exciting to be part of their journeys as they start them. But it's a bit like kind of giving it all back again. I kind of look at it, I think about it, and then it's not like my old days where it's kind of 24-hour 7-day consuming. It's something that I can put to one side and let them get on with it and not interfere and come back.
Several people we've spoken to have talked about that kind of naivety of the sort of younger kind of entrepreneurs, and actually it's great in terms of going out there and building businesses, but actually having that expertise and knowledge of however many years in larger corporates is invaluable to help them and guide them.
Yeah, and I think that's the idea, trying to give back, but at the same time the level of enthusiasm and kind of commitment to change things that they have is something that you really want to encourage. You certainly don't want to kind of say, well, I wouldn't do it that way, or I think it's a change for me, because it's much more of asking questions as much as guiding or directing. Trying to ask the right questions, which allows them to think about things potentially in a different way to the ways that they've already done. So that's what I hope anyway.
Oh, it's been so good to talk to you today. I have one final question. If you were walking in and taking on a new CEO role tomorrow, and you were walking in to address the kind of the board or senior leadership team, what would be one of the key agenda points that you'd want to discuss?
Well, I think one of the things I learned early on was, I think what I always want to do is as much as you want to look at the financials and the strategy, and really what you want to do is get out and talk to the people who work in the business in small groups, and really be in full listening mode, because I don't think you can really understand a business through its numbers, its kind of prospectuses, through its strategies. I think you can really only understand a business from the individuals who work at every level, and letting them talk to you and really listen. I think that arms you with something about the culture of the business, where it really is rather than where it thinks it is or wants to be. So I think talking to people.
Listening. Thank you, Naz. It's been great to talk to you today.
Great pleasure.